Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. 1 2 3. 1 2 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to start the event. I request everyone to please take their seats. Also, everyone is requested to either turn off their mobile phones or either turn it into silent mode. We will start the event with the recitation of Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان صدق الله العظيم.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I am Hamdan Khan, and I will be conducting today's proceedings. On the behalf of Strategic Vision Institute, I welcome you all to today's book launch. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered here for the formal launch of the book titled India's Nuclear Diplomacy Post-May 1998, a Discourse Analysis, authored by Director Research SVI, Dr. Nasir Hafeez. We congratulate Dr. Nasir on his maiden book publication and wish him many more such achievements. The book is a fascinating read, especially for people interested in India's nuclear diplomacy and the country's strategic thinking. Before moving to the formal proceedings, I will briefly outline the format of today's event. The event will formally start with welcome remarks by Executive Director SVI, Dr. Naeem Salik. This will be followed by the keynote address by Advisor National Command Authority, Lieutenant General Sarfaraz Sattar. Subsequently, the reviewers, Mr. Khalid Banoori, Ambassador Zamir Akram, and Dr. Hassan Askari Rizvi will present their reviews. After that, we will have comments by the author of the book, Dr. Nasir Hafeez. Finally, the chief guest of the day, Mr. Mushahid Hussain Sayyed, will make his keynote speech. The event will conclude with a group photo, which would be followed by refreshments. Although the distinguished speakers for today's event require no introduction, I will briefly introduce each speaker before they take the stage. So let's move to the formal proceedings of today's event. It's my pleasure to invite Executive Director SVI, Dr. Naeem Salik, for welcome remarks. Dr. Naeem Salik holds a PhD from University of Western Australia. He has previously served as Director for Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs at Strategic Plans Division. He has taught at QAU, NDU, and Air University, and he has been a visiting fellow at Stanford University, Johns Hopkins University, Stimson Center, and the Brookings Institution. He has published 4 books, several monographs, and has contributed 7 book chapters. Dr. Salik has authored more than 40 research articles. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you, Hamdan. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank our distinguished guest today. We are thankful to Mr. Mushahid Hussain Sayyed, General Sarfaraz Sattar, and all the distinguished guests who have graced this occasion and honored us by their presence. It's a very happy day today for SVI because one of our directors research, Dr. Nasir Hafeez, has published his book by an internationally renowned publisher, Routledge. And as Amdan was also saying, we wish him many more such successes. I can see another potential author sitting there in the front row. I'm sure he'll be the next to follow. Uh, as far as India's nuclear diplomacy is concerned, uh, we are lucky that we have Ambassador Zamir Akram here, who has done a very exhaustive study on Pakistan's nuclear diplomacy. And now we have the other side of the picture as well, though Dr. Nasir Hafeez's study concentrates mainly on India's diplomacy post 1998, which was epitomized by the several rounds of Jaswant Singh Talbot dialogue, which led to the India-US nuclear deal, and finally the exceptional waiver which was granted to India with the help of the American political capital and the diplomatic clout. It is not that India has started its nuclear diplomacy post 1998. As we all know, India started its nuclear program in 1944, a year before the first nuclear device was tested, and little more than a year before the first two bombs were dropped at the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Uh, Homi Bhabha, who was the initiator of this program, had designed the program in a way that though it was ostensibly a peaceful nuclear program, but he has designed it in a way that the possibility of weaponization of this program was always there. And despite his nuclear weapons ambitions, Homi Bhabha became one of the loudest voices at the international forums in support of nuclear disarmament. And that has been the case that while India was harboring its nuclear weapons ambitions, it also presented itself as a champion of nuclear disarmament. And this duality of approach continued even till today. I am not going to go into the specific details of the book because we are lucky to have three very eminent reviewers. Uh, I would especially like to thank Dr. Hassan Askari Rizvi for traveling all the way from Lahore in this inclement weather. Uh, and I'm sure you are going to have a very exhaustive and comprehensive review of the book subsequently. Uh, Once again, I would like to thank all of you for joining us for this event, and especially our distinguished guests. And I hand over to Hamdan for further proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir. Now I will invite Advisor National Command Authority, Lieutenant General Sarfaraz Sattar, for the keynote address. Lieutenant General Sarfaraz was commissioned in Armored Corps and is a graduate of Command and Staff College, Quetta, Egyptian Staff College, Cairo, and National Defense University, Islamabad. During his 38-year-long military service, Lieutenant General Sarfaraz served as Defense and Army Advisor in New Delhi and Director General of Military Intelligence. He commanded Pakistan Army's Strike Corps, and his last assignment was Director General, Strategic Plans Division. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hamdan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dr. Naeem Salik, Executive Director, SVI. Dr. Naeem is a known voice in strategic circles with many books to his credit. Dr. Nasir Hafeez, Director, SVI, and the author of today's book. Senator Mushahid Hussain Sayyid, the chief guest for today's ceremony, former Federal Minister of Information and Broadcasting, whom I value greatly for his very candid and forthright views on all national and international affairs. Ambassador Retired Zamir Akram, whose advisor NCA and whose views are valued greatly in SPD, and his advice is always sought. Dr. Hassan Askari Rizvi, Professor Emeritus at the Punjab University, Air Commodore Khalid Banori, who's ex-DG ECDA and a long-standing DG ECDA who has a lot of contributions towards SPD. Excellencies, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. It's indeed a pleasure and a privilege for me to be invited here today as a keynote speaker for today's book launch ceremony of the book, The Indian Nuclear Diplomacy Post-May 1998, a discourse analysis by Dr. Nasir Hafeez. I feel privileged to be invited among all the accomplished names and eminent personalities who are not only accomplished in their fields, but are also opinion makers and leading voices in shaping narratives both domestically and internationally. It's also a matter of great pleasure for me to, on two counts, to be here today. First, that over the last 3 years, this is the fourth book related to nuclear deterrence and strategic stability, topics which has been published by Pakistani authors. First came Ambassador Zamir Akram's book in 2023, Pakistan's Nuclear Deterrence and Diplomacy. Second was the book by ISSI on Emerging Threats and Strategic Doctrines. Then came Professor Zafar Jaspar's book on arms control in South Asia. And now this book by Dr. Nasir Hafeez, which as mentioned has been published by Routledge, giving the book a wider circulation. The second reason which gives me pleasure to be here today is the fact that our side of the story is being told more and more. And in the process, there is serious work at exposing the Indian narrative, which to say the least is based on lies, deceit, fabrication, and is built around anti-Pakistan hate rhetoric. From the beginning, and especially since the 1990s, the Indian diplomacy, whether it was by erstwhile politicians like Mr. Jaswant Singh, or even by diplomat turned politician like Subramaniam Jaishankar now, and even in intellectual discourses by writers like Vipin Narang and Ashley Tellis, all have based their rhetoric around branding Pakistan as the spoiler, the exporter of terrorism, or the biggest nuclear proliferator with risky nuclear behavior and a persistent cause of concern for the international community. They have done this branding with the purpose of getting their own acceptability in the West. There has generally been a lack of response from our sides towards such Indian bluster and narrative shaping. Given this environment, Dr. Nasir Hafeez's book is a welcome addition and a much needed work which exposes India's real face amidst all the fabrications and even outright lies for such narrative shaping. He not only tackles the root cause by exposing the Indian society's real face based on Mahabharata and Veda's teachings leading to Hindutva ideology, but also exposes the Indian worldview based on which on one hand has firm Hindutva roots with aspirations for restoring the ancient Mahabharata borders, and on the other hand is structured on the facade of non-violent Ashima or secularist India. Dr. Nasir goes on to explore the Indian intellectual behavior, particularly her engagement with international non-proliferation regimes and her nuclear diplomacy. The author lays bare the contradictions in Indian attitude and stance towards all important nuclear-related treaties like the NPT, the CTBT, or the FMCT during negotiation stage, and the about turn they took when it came to actual signing of these treaties. In addition to exposing Indian mindset, it has also been clearly articulated in the book how, despite Indian nuclear tests and resultant US sanctions in 1998, the US government started negotiations with India for better relations between the two countries for geopolitical reasons, and how India, using this opportunity, kept insisting on acceptance of their status as a nuclear weapon state, which they finally got in the shape of the NSG waiver in 2008, despite not being signatory to the NPT. And as you all very well know, NPT originally came into being as a result of the Indian violations of the peaceful uses of nuclear technology. Ladies and gentlemen, this NSG waiver enabled India to sign nuclear cooperation agreements with US, with UK, Japan, Australia, Russia, among others, for nuclear trade and particularly for amassing huge quantities of uranium, freeing all domestically produced uranium for weapons use. While tracing this diplomacy behind the achievement of this de facto status, the author exposes how Indians used different stances in public and private discussions with their US counterparts, conceding a thing in private and then taking an about turn in public. How they presented a victim's narrative by using the pretexts of national security, of using democracy and its common values, and of being a so-called victim of terrorism, and that India has no threats to any country and has no aggressive designs against any country except those inimical towards it, as if the Mahabharata cause and the expansionist aspirations never existed and are not pursued by Hindutva ideologues any longer. Dr. Nasir has also gone about scientifically analyzing the available official documents to expose the intent behind and the real purpose of each document, and through them the author has exposed how India has positioned itself with the image of a state with responsible nuclear behavior in order to integrate with the international system and at the same time close any opportunities or avenues available to Pakistan. I would like to commend Dr. Nasir for exposing Indian society's real makeup, its treatment towards minorities, its attitude towards all the neighbors, particularly towards Pakistan and China, and its double-speak in tackling various international treaties and regimes. He has exposed the real face of India and amply brought out that they can never be trusted with anything or for serving anyone's purpose, especially if they see little or no benefit for themselves, and that they are willing to flout international norms and treaties or conventions to get benefits from all ends without fulfilling their end of the bargain or taking any risk for anyone's or on any country's behalf. This same sentiment has been noted in Washington by Mr. Ashley Tellis, who's echoed it in his latest book chapter in the latest book, Lessons from the Cold War, which has just come out in Washington. By way of warning or advance alert to India, he says, this choice of the middle path, however rational for New Delhi, nevertheless leaves Washington with diminished incentives to aid India as expensively as each may like. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also say here that India, which projects itself as the multicultural, multi-ethnic and multi-religious progressive society, the so-called largest democracy of the world and rising global superpower, is actually in the clutches or throes of Hindutva's ugly face, which we saw in Gujarat in 2002, or have seen in communal violence ever since independence, and especially in 1984 in Amritsar, or as late as 2024 in New Delhi, and in all major capitals of provinces like Maharashtra and UP, or even in April this year in Murshidabad in West Bengal. Hindutva has risen through the ballot box, making all non-Hindu minorities in India, especially Muslims and Christians, feel more and more insecure. And unless we continue to uncover this true and real and ugly face of Indian society in front of the world through our resolute words and actions, like we just saw during Operation Bunyan al-Marsus, the world will not be able to fully fathom this true face or the true potential of India hidden behind the facade or the smoke screen which they have created. For us, the lessons are clear that India, a de facto nuclear power status which it has achieved through deceit, is a regional bully with hegemonic designs which are emboldened by the day due to its economic rise as a result of the embrace of the West, and that India will continue to coerce us either to fight or to start giving in. This leaves us only with one choice: try to defend our homeland with whatever means are available to us short of war. But if war is imposed, then do whatever it takes to win by improving the correlation of forces at the point of decision. This is not a game for the faint-hearted. National survival and dignity can only be maintained through utmost resolve and strongest faith in Almighty Allah. In the end, let me conclude by quoting from John F. Kennedy's speech of 22nd October 1962, which he delivered at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and which I have often quoted elsewhere as it holds important lessons for us since it suits our situation. And I quote, "Aggressive conduct if allowed to go unchecked, ultimately leads to war. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom in our region. Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, let me in the end once again commend Dr. Nasir Hafeez for his worthy effort in putting together a book of high value and intellect, which is a treasured addition to our strategic literature and discourse. Thank you very much for a patient hearing.
Thanks a lot, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for book reviews. Our first reviewer is Mr. Khalid Bunuri, who is currently Senior Advisor, Project Phoenix, and is advisor to PAF on training rejuvenation. He was a fighter pilot and flight instructor in the PAF with diverse interests in aviation, nuclear politics, and arms control. Mr. Banuri has over 2 decades of experience in arms control and nuclear diplomacy. He was the first Director General of Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs Branch at Strategic Plans Division. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you for a generous introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Some years ago, I was in a fellowship at Washington, D.C., and there was Sardaji who came for a meeting. There was an Indian professor who was also in the room. There were and myself and a Japanese officer as well. And Sardaji made a very interesting comment in the course of those discussions. He told that Indian professor that, you know, all you Indians speak whatever your government is saying, whether you are in your country or elsewhere. But Pakistanis, they speak their mind. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the important points that Dr. Nasir Hafeez has also made in his expose on the issue of diplomacy. Diplomacy is all shades of gray, and how to deal with it and find the best path is something that you do. So it is my absolute pleasure to review this highly reflective book on the discourse analysis of Indian nuclear diplomacy post 1998. Now, packed in these 170 pages of text, it will give you an insight of a rather uncharted area, at least formally, on nuclear diplomacy and focusing on India. But first, something about the author. I first came across Nasir Hafeez when he had undertaken a master's degree program on nuclear politics in the university. And I saw him even at that time as a highly reflective person. His preparations were always deep and his reflections were objective. No wonder then that he went on to undertake a PhD dissertation in an area where formal his work is that he is focused on and analyze them both using both the qualitative and quantitative methods at places. Often people who provide such opinion have been questioned around the world. And worse, some like Galileo have faced tougher times. But Nasir went ahead and did this. He has packed an outlook that is a must read. Does that mean that it's absolutely perfect? Perhaps there are issues of criticism as well, but more on that later. The book itself is divided into 6 chapters, apart from the introduction and conclusion. He walks the reader through his theoretical discourse analysis, goes on to how India views the world and it in itself. And on other places in recent years, I have commented, just cannot resist bringing that up, that I have referred to India as Alice in Wonderland, that through the looking glass, India wants to see itself as a country with the kind of power that United States perhaps has, the kind of technologies that Israelis perhaps have. But through that mirror, that looking glass, in May 2025 was this box on the nose that India has faced, and that perhaps is going to walk you through to how the future will turn out that way. Then thereafter, the remaining chapters, a very important aspect of the remaining chapters of the book, it looks at the Indian engagement with the nuclear non-proliferation regime, both at track 1 or the public level, and also at the track 2 or track 1.5 as the private sphere. And that is where he uses whatever information he has been able to gather to put some sense into this. You know, he's used this terminology of I think sense making or something similar, which I had to look up if it was a proper terminology, and I found that it has that explanation of making sense of how things are rather than what those facts are actually appearing to be. So as he walks the reader through the Indian approach, he points as a very important point of consistency and continuity of the policy through various Indian administrations, especially the Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh, but also in a different way with the BJP thereafter. Any study classically deals with the why, what, and how questions. I think Nasir Street. So the study points at the main contours of Indian nuclear diplomacy. It looks at um, Indian attempt on transparency, on ambiguity and opacity at the same time, the balance between that. He views Indian diplomacy as a plan to mainstream India in the nuclear field, but also notes that the circumstances provided India more opportunities than, which basically means that it might have taken them longer to gel into the international system had those circumstances not been in that direction. He points at the use of tradition, for example, through references to Mahabharata or Arthashastra as an approach. Despite the intense limitation that this author faced, primarily not the inability to be able to talk to Indian interlocutors directly, but also the access to the declassified documents. This content analysis has really done well. I must mention that there is now a provision in India for declassification, but here's the catch. For any declassified documents that Indian Ministry of External Affairs allows, one has to go in physically to access those documents. And there are some Indian authors who have actually accessed and written abundantly about it, and perhaps I could refer to this later on looking at some of those assessments that they've made. So basically, the diplomacy question looks at the whole hog. It looks at three approaches. India saying nuclear weapons are political weapons and they're meant for self-defense. And it also builds upon India's image as the peacenik, as a state which is very neutral and so on and so forth. And simultaneously putting Pakistan in a bad light. Now, this is something that Nasir has shown through evidence of the data that comes out from neutral sources or Indian sources. And he has built this thought of why, and it makes a lot of sense why this would happen. 1172, UN Security Council resolution, when it came, it talked to both India and Pakistan. It kind of put us both in that direction of not being part of the NPT, so nothing wrong legally. However, asking both countries to reverse the program and so on and so forth. And India wanted a wedge to show that Pakistani-Indian case were different, and that's what Nasir has painstakingly explained how it has gone in that direction. Um, and he basically figures that the Indian diplomacy remained largely sustained regardless of which administration was in the power. And as I said earlier, BJP in a different way. And it built an incremental pressure, initially taking very tough positions when negotiations with the US, and later on softening that stance. As I was reading through the book, and I kind of looked at several aspects with satisfaction of how Pakistan went about doing the initial phase of this. And at the cost of pointing out an individual, let me point at my former teacher and also my former boss, named Salek, to say that there was an Indian delegation, and in which a serious Indian researcher told another person, look at these two guys. They do the good cop, bad cop so well. One shoots from the hip, and the other says, don't cry, but he's right. And that's the kind of sense that we have. But what Nasir is saying is that Jaswant Singh did both of those things in the same way, which is very interesting to maintain that position. And he thinks that the discourse process, and it's very important to actually think of the process, because process matters. And he says that there were 6 angles: the discourse of national security, the discourse of democracy, talking about the largest democracy and so forth, the discourse of terrorism, the discourse of the Indian identity, and somewhat racist discourse. And he's saying that it was apartheid to actually stop India from getting this thing. And finally, the development discourse, how useful it was that way. If I want to think of the criticism, I have one major criticism, and which is the book is expensive. It will need to reach people, and perhaps this version or a later version or later research should help doing something like that. In the sense of the dual policy, on one side propagating disarmament, and on the other side continuing with the nuclear weapons acquisition. Perhaps one should think of no morality in international relations kind of a slogan. Whatever India did this way, and they did that, and he's shown it through evidence, has been done earlier. The United States used the bomb and then tried to persuade the former Soviet Union not to do so. Any state, and let me just say this in a general sense, any state that has nuclear weapons would ordinarily be seen as the largest champion of non-proliferation. I have it, but you guys should think twice. So that's the realism that one has to think of. Okay. Another important aspect that comes out, and it struck me in this sense, was the balance that you have. I mean, Pakistan, I think, is fortunate that there's this non-partisan or bipartisan support to the nuclear program in whatever way, although it is translated in different ways by different groups, and aspects are brought out in different ways. But there is support to this program because it is a matter of survival. And then it is, it has to be taken in that direction of how you look at the big picture and take this forward. Now, one of the important lessons that he's also made is the use of the language. And there have been several attempts on actually using the correct terminologies. And that also brings in this idea of meeting the private sector and public sector in using the same kind of terminologies, because it can easily give erroneous impressions. We have done that in Pakistan too, and there's some thoughts have been continuously sustained. Persistence is, of course, the way. I want to just mention one odd. I refer to the Indian Ministry of External Affairs declassifying some of the documents. So I would urge the audience to think of an Indian author called Yogesh Joshi, who has at least one book with Frank O'Donnell, about the Indian policy, and it does have some references. I haven't read the book, I haven't had access to it, but some references to some aspects that are discussed in this book. So there are some who have done this, and Yogesh Joshi is known to have taken an independent view of how things are. So there are some aspects which can help out. Then some of the things that we have seen, and I think Nasir's test is one area that we can actually see as a sense of the intelligence preparation of the battlefield. When you are acquiring a capability, you talk about, you work on the contingency, you think about those things. So those areas have been done. Some of these examples he has quoted from the Indian perspective, but there are other side. We have also done this. When both Pakistan and India had acquired this capability, the general impression was that India will be like United States, will lot of transparency, and Pakistan will be like the former Soviet Union, Iron Curtain. And Pakistan actually proved it wrong and showed that it could talk about things from the position of strength. So those are some ideas that can actually be thought about. I would now urge not only this audience to actually read this book, but also urge people like Nasir Hafeez and perhaps others to think of collated, more focused work to take this work forward. What is different today than when this journey started is the influence of the social media and how quickly disinformation or information or lack of information actually starts to affect. This is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity to actually build beyond this. And then perhaps promoting or encouraging further studies is something that one can do that in various ways. So I would like to end by saying that I hope that there can be more collaborative studies to focus on the aspects of diplomacy that have come out in a very, very significant way, and how the kind of lessons that exist can be used for countries like ours. Some of them will have to come out in a way, in an objective analysis like this one, in which you look at the evidence, you look at the facts, and which also means the information has to flow out in more ways. Let me stop at this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Our second reviewer is Ambassador Zamir Akram, who is currently an advisor to Strategic Plans Division. He holds a master's degree in international relations from London School of Economics. Ambassador Zamir has served as Pakistan's ambassador and permanent rep to United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, apart from holding several other important diplomatic assignments. Ambassador Zamir Akram regularly contributes to newspapers and has authored a book titled The Security Imperative, Pakistan's Nuclear Deterrence and Diplomacy. Sir.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Nasir Hafeez and Mr. Naeem Salik for giving me the honor to share my comments on Nasir's book, and also to share this occasion with such distinguished personalities such as Senator Mushahid Hussain, General Sarfraz Sattar, and of course my colleagues from SPD and the Foreign Office. The when I was approached by Dr. Nasir Hafeez and the SPI to review his book, I was extremely pleased to do so. And because, for one thing, I have known Dr. Nasir Hafeez now on and off for almost 10 years since I have been back in Pakistan and been a part of the SPD and in regular interactions with the SVI. And also because this book is a different approach towards looking at the issue of India's nuclear policies, because as the title demonstrates, it's a discourse analysis. It's an academic approach, and I must admit that in the beginning, I had to sort of reread the introduction and the earlier theoretical part of the book to familiarize myself with what is meant by discourse analysis. I finished my education a long time ago, and I'm not current with what the recent thinking or approaches are. So this is what but I am all the more educated for it by reading this very excellent book. I want to begin by recognizing some of the issues that Dr. Nasir Hafeez has raised. One, about the fact that India's nuclear program uh, goes back all the way from the creation or the independence of the country, or perhaps as Mr. Naim Saleh pointed out, even before that. And this was a duplicitous policy to begin with, because on the one hand, the beginning with the Nehru government right up till the nuclear tests, perhaps even after the nuclear tests, India has always sought the role of a champion of nuclear non-proliferation. But while they were doing this, Mr. Homi Bhabha was working on a parallel program to develop India's nuclear weapons capability. And this was acknowledged indirectly or implicitly by Mr. Nehru immediately after independence, when he said that we may have to change our approach depending on circumstances. So he held that possibility out to pursue the development of nuclear weapons. The two-track program was, of course, not just a program that, because normally the BJP is associated with the pursuit of nuclear weapons capability, because it's always been a part of their election manifesto. They've always said that India should be a nuclear weapons state. Whereas the Congress party was seen as a party that did not wish to pursue this. But this was a differentiation only in terms of statements or public statements. If anything, the BJP was much more open about its own intentions. Because remember, the first step that India took towards nuclear weapons attainment was the test in 1974, which was, of course, under a Congress government of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. So both parties have pursued this approach, and as is identified in a very detailed account of India's nuclear policy in George Perkovich's book, which I'm sure most of you have read it. This was a policy that enjoyed virtual unanimous support in the country. Of course, there were some parties like the Communist Party or others that did not think that attaining nuclear weapons was in India's interest. But the majority of the Indians were in support of this approach. Interestingly, and what is not known broadly, even in the West, that the US itself was not necessarily opposed to India's nuclear program. And that is borne out by the fact that when the Chinese exploded their nuclear weapon, their nuclear bomb, there was thinking in the US at that time that that the US could possibly help India also acquire nuclear weapons to change to balance the Chinese nuclear capability. So this trend, in fact, has continued, and I think that there is a basic fundamental difference in the US and generally the Western approach towards the nuclear weapons programs of India and Pakistan. Because even after 1974, if you notice the record, uh, the US actually did not punish India for its transgression and for introducing nuclear proliferation in South Asia. In fact, they continued to provide assistance, military and economic assistance. And Mr. Henry Kissinger, who was then Secretary of State, is famously recalled as saying that nothing will be gained by chastising India now that they have crossed this threshold. And so the real impact of the reaction to the Indian nuclearization fell on actually on Pakistan. And I have another theory about that, and I won't go into it. I think that it was also because not so much out of non-proliferation concerns, but out of concerns that a Muslim country should not acquire nuclear weapons. And the unspoken threat at that time, and even to this day, is that such a country, such a Muslim country with nuclear weapons can always be a potential threat to Israel. But that's a different story. We're coming back to Dr. Nasir Hafeez's book. I want to emphasize one or two parts of the negotiations that he has very meticulously recounted between the United States and the US, between the US and the Indian leadership at that time. And he begins by outlining how the government of India, the BJP government, recently elected at that time, appointed Mr. Jaswant Singh as a confidant of Prime Minister Vajpayee to open a secret channel of communications with the US administration, with the Clinton administration. And this actually presaged, this was prior to the test act they having, before the tests of May 1998 that India conducted. And this effort by the US to engage with India was obviously from their side to gauge where the BJP government was going. And I happened to be in those days in Washington, in our embassy, and I recall attending a lecture by the then American ambassador to India, Mr. Wisner. And I asked him a question in a room like this about India's intentions. And he said that he was confident that the new government of Mr. Vajpayee, despite all the rhetoric and despite the Indian BJP manifesto, recognized that conducting a nuclear test would amount to, in his words, would amount to a train wreck, and that he would not want to derail the process of improvement in US-India relations. Well, and that also, perhaps, Dr. Nasir, you should follow up this book with a book on the Pakistan-US dialogue, on the discourse that we were having. Because on our side of the story is that the tests took place in May. In March of that year, the then Prime Minister of Pakistan wrote letters to all the permanent members of the Security Council, and as the representatives of Pakistan in Washington, myself and Ambassador Riaz Khokar were required to deliver this letter. This letter basically conveyed our concerns and implicitly warned that the Indians were preparing for a nuclear test. And this is, remember, in March of 1998. The Indians, of course, were denying all this through this channel that Dr. Nasir Hafeez has recounted in his book through Jaswant Singh and others. But when the tests took place, I was told by American colleagues that Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and the Strobe Talbot, the Deputy Secretary of State, were in a meeting in which they were planning a visit by President Clinton to India. So, and they learned about this. This is a fact, because it's admitted by an American diplomat. They learned about the test from CNN. Because during that entire period, the American satellites were focused entirely, exclusively on Pakistan. And they were trying to see what Pakistan is going to do. So it's not a surprise to me, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, that once the tests took place, of course, there was this whole bluster from the Clinton administration, but it died down pretty quickly. Consider the fact that in 1998, the tests took place, the Americans imposed sanctions on both India and Pakistan. But by 2000, early spring of the year 2000, Mr. Clinton was in New Delhi and claiming to open a new chapter in relations with the Indians. And also in the negotiations itself, as you have pointed out very clearly, the attempt was to somehow legitimize, at least, I mean, obviously the Indian attempt was to seek legitimacy after having conducted these tests, to engage with the US, to convince the US that India was a responsible nuclear power, and that it was a fait accompli. You need to accept this and accept it and treat India as a partner. The interesting part is that the Indians were actually leaning on an open door, because the Americans had already decided much earlier that India was going to be a partner against a rising China, and China was rising even at that time. And so this was a predetermined. So this test, in the words of the Americans, was a bump in the road. It did not divert the relationship. And that bump was overcome pretty quickly. And of course, the Indians and Indian diplomacy must be given credit. And Mr. Jaswant Singh played a master hand with Strobe Talbot. He ran rings around Strobe. Strobe didn't actually know what was going on. And if you read his book, he admits as much in his book that the Indians got the better of him. And then you see what happened afterwards. And that is where I will end, is that pretty soon what Clinton started was taken further by the Bush administration, by concluding the civilian nuclear agreement with India, by providing the NSG waiver for India. by concluding the the quadrilateral arrangement, or the trinity of quadrilateral arrangement of cooperation in nuclear, space, military, and technology areas. And then, of course, subsequently by the Obama administration, the 4 foundational agreements coming up to the present time. So it is, of course, a success of Indian diplomacy, which you have recounted in your book, how the basis for this success was laid. But the point that we need to remember is that there was a geopolitical environment which facilitated India's ability to achieve these objectives that they've set, and they did a marvelous job, and they've done an excellent job. We must give credit to where it's due. The last point is that as compared to Pakistan, and this is our experience during that same negotiating process, because there were 8 rounds that Strobe held with the Indians and with us, more or less simultaneously. The difference between Pakistan and the Indians was, I think this is a critical difference. The Indians were comfortable with the fact that their economy would be able to deal with whatever sanctions the US would impose on them. On our side, and Mr. Mushahid Hussain can give us a better idea, there was a great deal of concern as to how we would deal with these sanctions. The Saudis gave us some assurances, the Chinese gave us some assurances. But the point I want to make is that our economic weakness, as compared to India's economic robustness, did not provide our negotiators, Mr. Shamshad Ahmad and his team, the kind of strong hand to play and negotiate with the Americans. So that was the big difference between our 2 things. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to invite our 3rd reviewer, Dr. Hassan Askari Rizvi, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at University of Punjab. Dr. Rizvi has decades of academic and policy experience and has worked extensively with international think tanks, universities, and both Pakistani and international media. Dr. Rizvi earned his PhD from University of Pennsylvania. His research and teaching have focused on South Asian politics, civil-military relations, and security issues in Pakistan. Dr. Rizvi was awarded prestigious Sitara Imtiaz by President of Pakistan in 2010 for the outstanding contributions to political science scholarship. Sir, the floor is yours.
The chief guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be here to review a book which I enjoyed reading. The book under review examines nuclear weapons in a broader context, or in a broader perspective of history, India's national identity, security considerations, and nuclear diplomacy. And it also deals with the issue of how India's nuclear policy changed over time. Most Pakistani experts or writers on nuclear issue have generally focused on a narrow view of nuclear weapons and its delivery system in comparison to India. And there has been a little work to focus on nuclear diplomacy and what are the dimensions of nuclear diplomacy, which have been discussed by two earlier speakers, and also global pressures on some countries' nuclear program that attempted to sustain the primacy of the older nuclear powers. That kind of a discriminatory approach that has not been, you know, done in great detail in Pakistan. However, I would mention at least two sets of books which have seen, you know, nuclear weapons not only in the context of South Asia but also globe as a whole. And here I would, mention the book by Ambassador Zamir Akram, The Security Imperative, which takes into account the whole, the security as well as diplomatic dimension. And secondly, the books by Brigadier Naeem Salek on Pakistan's nuclear program and its diplomatic context, as well as the book on India edited by him, provide us a lot of, information on the diplomatic dimension of the nuclear program. And this book that we are reviewing takes on this tradition to see nuclear weapons in a broader, context. In my view, the book raises 5 fundamental issues, which I would mention very briefly here, then go in some detail. The first is that the book has used the discourse analysis, and so therefore the question arises: what is this discourse approach, and how far this approach is better than the approaches that other writers have used over time? Second, why and how discourse analysis has become more relevant in the present day context, and why the issue of competing narratives about global developments, nuclear weapons development, is important. Third, Indian elite narrative to justify their nuclear weapons. And it is an interesting, reading to see how they change their explanation to justify the nuclear weapons in 1998. And next point, which is very clearly outlined in this book, is the duality in India's nuclear policy, or double speak, what we call, is very significant, and this book points out to that. And finally, milestones and turning points in India's nuclear program as articulated by this book, especially the two phases, 98 to 2000, and then from 2000 to 2008. These are two important phases. In addition to these, 5 important issues, I may emphasize 2 additional issues, which are partly from the book and they are partly my own articulation. One, why and how often India succeeding getting its way when it was dealing with nuclear weapons. India has succeeded in that. Why it succeeded? Part of it has been explained by Ambassador Zamir Akram, and I will add 1 or 2 points to that. Second, how discourse and content analysis approaches are useful to focus on security in South Asia after May 25, the latest May. Why this is important. Now coming to the first point of discourse analysis. Now discourse analysis that has been used in this book is a standard research methodology which is used, and in social sciences it is often described as the content analysis, where we use qualitative as well as quantitative methodology to examine important documents, policy statements, and key statements of the policymakers. We focus in such an approach on words, phrases, sentences used, repeated themes, the emphasis on different ideas given by the policy makers, and how that emphasis changes over time. That's also an important. What it gives us is an idea how the mindset of the policy maker works, what are the preferences that the policy maker emphasizes, policymakers' orientations, perceptions, and interpretation of the situation. We can understand from uh, this content analysis. And in this connection, the author has used 7 important Indian documents and also the talks between Jaswant Singh and Strawberry Talbot from June 1998 to January 2000. There were 11 sessions which were held, which were, analyzed to bring out data. Now, why discourse analysis is important today? Discourse analysis, is important because in the past it was possible for the governments to control the discourses because media was very limited. Its scope was also very limited. Therefore, official narrative dominated, whether you are talking of nuclear weapons or talking of something else. But today, with new communication and information technologies, internet-based platforms, and also satellite TV and radio, there's a lot of information that is flowing around. Therefore, the official narrative has to compete with other narratives, which may be based on falsehood, on propaganda, but then nevertheless, there are other alternative narratives available. And in order to counter the narrative of your adversary, you need to understand what your adversary is talking about. That you have to understand his mindset and his narrative, which will enable you to prepare a counter narrative. Therefore, the analysis of how your adversary is making an argument, whether you agree or don't agree with it, how that argument is being used, you have to prepare a counter. And for that, this approach, the discourse analysis or content analysis, as we call it, is important. And I can give you an example from the book. For example, a broadly based argument about India's nuclear program is global. It is a global status driven nuclear program as well as security driven. But global status is an important aspect of India's nuclear program. Now, how do you establish this scientifically? You make this statement, fine. But how do you establish that scientifically, that India's nuclear program is global status driven? Now, that can be done very easily if you take into account the discourse and content analysis of important statements, documents, and policy declarations of India, starting from 98 to onward. And this comes out clearly when the book makes their discourse analysis of the 7 documents and 11 meetings that have taken place. In fact, I have made for my own use a list of India's explanation to 98 nuclear explosion, and you could identify very easily 7 to 8 explanations which have changed over time. Given the context, given the circumstances, India changed its argument to meet the requirement very clearly. Now, the discourse analysis in this book brings out an important dilemma in India's foreign policy and India's security policy. That is the search for status at the international level. That has influenced India's security policy, and also a gap between self-image and India's identity as articulated by the dominant Indian elite and the realities of regional and global politics, which did not recognize that kind of status the Indian government or Indian leaders desired. And the elite project is that they not only talked about India's greatness in the past with civilization and also a cultural entity influencing international system. And the author has, talked about the sources right from starting from Kotlia's book to statements of Pandit Nehru. That's one set of argument to emphasize India's greatness. Second type of things that you come across is when you read about how they view the situation today. That is, India arguing that within South Asia, territory-wise, it's a leading country, population, industrial base, military power, but it does not get what Indians think at its due status. That kind of dilemma is very much there, and their concern is why India's dominant position is not being acknowledged within South Asia and outside the South Asia, and why India is not viewed as an important uh, competitor for China. When you make this kind of exaggerated image building, which India has been doing, you use two kind of processes in making the argument. One process is when you make a selective use of history. You make a selective history. You pick up certain things from history that serve your argument. You discard what doesn't serve you. Selective use of history, and also writing and rewriting of history. Now, why I'm emphasizing these two things? Because by reading the book and also the discussion on the dialogue that took place between Jaswant Singh and Talbot, you come across this selective use of history and also writing and rewriting of history in the arguments that Jaswant Singh makes to Talbot in different meetings that took place. For example, I'll just mention few things here. For example, his views on establishment of Pakistan, negative views, and denial of due status to India at the global level. He complains, frequently why India is not being given its due status. Then why India should be tagged with Pakistan. The whole debate, dehyphenation between India and Pakistan. India is a global level player. India is a player of major powers. That kind of complaint he repeatedly makes in that dialogue, and it is very much clear. Uh, and also India's Jaswant Singh makes on several occasions the argument, what I call the civilizational and cultural argument. That is, Judeo-Christian West and secular India and moderate Islamic state versus radical Islamic states, Pakistan, and Pakistan as promoter of terrorism. You will find these negative kind of statements there. Therefore, you can better understand how the mind was working and how the Indian leadership thinks about Pakistan. Another point which I may mention briefly here: duality in India's argument, or double speak. I mean, this has been, said by earlier speakers, so I'll not get into, you know, in this argument for long. Simply saying that India has been saying and upholding one thing, and when it comes to practical policy making, doing something different. That has been, always there. So talking of global disarmament, but not accepting any restriction or any restraint on its nuclear program. And this has been a characteristic feature of India. However, my argument is that duality or double speak is not merely in the nuclear policy. In all Indian policies, political policies, security policies, you find that kind of dual track or dual speak. You go to Nehru era, for example. India had one face for the globe: non-alignment, peace, total disarmament, no weapons. But the other face was for Pakistan, which was very, very different, kind of face. And this duality became more obvious after India's military debacle in 1962 and and China's nuclear explosion in 1964. That had profound impact on India's, thinking. In fact, now it's part of history, although we don't need that. But nevertheless, the debate that developed in India between 1964 and 1974, when India made the first explosion, that debate on what kind of nuclear options India should exercise is still pertinent. Why it is still pertinent? Because some of the argument that Jaswant Singh makes overlap with the arguments that were made between 1964 and 1974 by the Indian academia and Indian, policy makers. Therefore, it becomes a useful, important aspect to understand that. The author mentions that only once on page 47, where he talks about Cohen talking about Stephen Cohen talking about, three groups in the debate. Actually, he was talking about 64 to 74 nuclear debate in India. And finally, two points which I want to make before conclude: how India gets its way in nuclear diplomacy despite duality and despite double speak. And in this connection, we are talking about US-India Agreement 2005 and also NSG waiver later on to India. Now, if you want to understand reasons, some of the reasons were mentioned by earlier speaker. One is that you have to relate yourself with the changing global environment. That is, you have to understand the global concerns about certain things, about the matters that you're dealing, to which, to the extent you are able to relate yourself to the changing circumstance will make you more effective, whether it's a nuclear diplomacy or the other diplomacy. Second, a positive relevance between your country and the international system. And that positive relevance is economics. How stable, coherent your economy is, and market opportunities, as also investment opportunities that you provide, and that gives you positive relevance. This increases the weight. And the final point here is, thirdly, the internal political and societal situation in a country, whether there are more conflicts there, and also the dynamics of domestic politics is extremely important at the global level, because your adversary, given modern communication and technology that is available, the adversary can easily exploit your internal, weaknesses. That has to be done. And one example that comes from the book, that is how you relate yourself with the concerns of the other, is again, I go back to the book and talk about Jaswant Singh. In August 1988, you would remember that US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania were hit. And the Americans blamed Osama bin Laden network based in Afghanistan as the group responsible for what has happened in these two, embassies. And then in August, in the same month, they took action against Osama's camps in Afghanistan. Now, why I'm narrating that? From that time onward, that is August 1988, Jaswant Singh repeatedly talks about terrorism and repeatedly accuses Pakistan of being involved in terrorism. And it is here that he described Pakistan as a terrorist state. And then the issue that would be a concluding issue, that is how discourse analysis that characterizes this book, how discourse analysis can be used to cope with post-May, I'm talking about May this year, post-May situations in this subcontinent, because in May this year, India has received a major setback to its overambitious strategies to paralyze Pakistan's security system below the nuclear threshold. It was a major Indian failure. Therefore, India has a feeling of being belittled in May. And what the process they are adopting to counter that is a propaganda at global level. Therefore, how the Indian dominant elite is perceiving the situation, how they are interpreting it, we need to examine that closely. And content analysis or discourse analysis will be useful, because this would enable us to fully cope with this diplomatic pressure that India is currently, trying to generate. So I would conclude by, congratulating the author that he has produced a volume that not only helps us to deal with global pressure on Pakistan's nuclear program, but also the pressures that Pakistan faces otherwise on its diplomacy as well as on its domestic politics. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to invite person of the day and author of the book, Dr. Nasir Hafeez, for his comments. Dr. Nasir Hafeez is Director of Research at Strategic Vision Institute. He holds a PhD from National Defense University, Islamabad, and has been associated with Johns Hopkins University as a visiting research associate. His research areas include national and international security, nuclear strategy, nuclear diplomacy, discourse analysis, strategic foresight, and scenario planning. Sir.
Thank you very much. Before I start, I think let me say that few present in this room are really enjoying this discussion, and especially my family members are, not relating to what is being said here. And I think after the end of this session, they will understand that the kind of animal I treat and I deal with daily, and then they will they will understand the anxieties I bring home every day, and then they have to bear with me. Thank you very much for that. So I really
Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim, distinguished guests, respected teachers, dear friends, colleagues, and my family members, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning. I'm really truly honored to welcome you all to this book launch of my first book. I have a special thanks to Jan Safraz and Senator Mushahid Hussain Saab for joining us as a keynote speaker. For me, this is not just the release of a publication. It is a story of nearly 15 years of my academic journey, a journey born of curiosity, carried forward through moments of joy and heartbreaks, hope and doubt, and sustained by an unshakable desire to understand the strategic behavior of a long standing adversary and a rising power in our neighborhood. This work would not have been possible without the guidance, support, and generosity of many mentors I had, and I'm lucky in that. I must remember first my supervisor, Dr. Parvez Iqbal Chima, whose wisdom shaped the early foundation of this research. Unfortunately, he passed away before I could conclude my study. May Allah grant him the highest place in Jannatul Firdaus. I owe profound thanks to my teacher, my mentor, and a true guide, Dr. Naeem Ahmed Salik sir, who introduced me to the complex and the layered world of nuclear and strategic studies in 2009 once I joined the master's program. That introduction became the very foundation on which my current work stands. To all my respected teachers, some of whom who are here and some are not here, thank you for shaping my understanding of international relations and the conceptual framework that animates them. I also thank Dr. Walter Anderson, who is not here, his colleagues at SAIS at Johns Hopkins University for facilitating my interaction with many US experts on India. A special note of appreciation for my teacher, Dr. Sarfaz Hussain Ansari, whose meticulous review and precise feedback pushed this work forward. And from him, I learned that the best teacher do not correct errors, they illuminate the paths. Finally, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all my family members, especially my late mother and my father, whose constant prayers for my success have always been my guide. I'm deeply thankful to my children, Fatma, Abdullah, Ismail, and Ibrahim, whose love and encouragements have always been a consistent source of strength and joy for me. And above all, my deepest gratitude goes to my wife, who has walked beside me through every triumph and trial. Her unwavering faith in me has been an anchor and my great strength. As we move to today's proceeding, I wish to express my heartiest gratitude to all the esteemed reviewers of my book for their valuable time, thoughtful engagement, and critical insight. My sincere thanks to Banori Saab, Zamir Akram Saab for their generous support and very generous and very enabling remarks. I am especially honored by the presence of Dr. Hassan Asri Rizvi, who has traveled all the way from Lahore to be with us. His engagement with my work means more to me than words can express, a privilege I really hold very dear to me. While I'll not respond to many comments made by the reviewers, each of whom brought a unique lens to the subject, and let me confess that a lot of things which they brought out, they further added to my perspective on into the Indian nuclear diplomacy, and that is where the discourse analysis is. The words which I wrote, once they read, their perspective added a new dimension and created a new meaning, which is because of their typical understanding and clarity and an exposure to a knowledge which I didn't have. So sometime the writer gets out and the text gets the precedence and the text creates a new reality. That is how I think the discourse analysis, as Dr. Hassan Askari was saying, that is a fascinating world of meaning making, how human beings create meaning over a period of time. And let me, just relate with the ayah which was read at the beginning of this this proceedings. Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, Khalaq al-Insan, Allamahul Bayan. That four epical, the items of the world, of the universe, the God Himself, Allah, Ar-Rahman, His discourse, Al-Quran, His best masterpiece creation, Insan, and the characteristics of expression which has been granted to him, which creates a new reality altogether. So these are the four epitomes of this entire human, journey of the learning. So here it connects with my thesis also. On certain points which were raised, sir, regarding the price, I already tried, and we are in communication with Routledge. Fortunately, let me share with you that publishing with Routledge has a very unique advantage. Now the book is currently available around the world, in all the universities, in all the think tanks, in all the databases, including Google, including Amazon, including the Kindle, and everywhere. And the kind of effort which is required to achieve this circulation is not possible with any local publishers. So that is the kind we are trying, but unfortunately the downside also that the book is not available because the price is very high. So we are trying for a reprint. So inshallah, sir, because the copyrights we have, so we will try to have a local reprint. I think, sir, very important point brought up by Ambassador Zamir Akram, sir, the secret channel, which was established before the conduct of Indian nuclear test. It has been overlooked. It grants and it allows us to establish that somehow or the other, I don't have the complete evidence, but the Americans were right involved even before the conduct of the test. So we cannot say with certainty that they were knowing it, but they were quite clear that what India was doing. One thing I just now recently again written in Arms Control today, that India, by conducting its nuclear test, has created a permanent state of disadvantage for itself. It has benefited us, but it has created a permanent state of disadvantage for India, because despite the asymmetry of conventional forces, they are unable to use it against Pakistan in a meaningful way. So that is the restraining capability of the nuclear weapons. Sir, on a lot of things which I wanted to say, but I think Dr. Hassan Askari Rizvi elaborated in a very consistent, concise manner the importance of the discourse analysis, and especially in the current information age, where even few tweets can start and can stop the war. So we really need to further, and I'm sorry, sir, that this academic work had to start with the theoretical framework. So had there been another, my teacher, Dr. Zulfikar here, he would have bear witness to a problem which I faced once I presented my paper, my thesis in NDU. So there was an objection that this is not a researchable topic, the kind of hurdles which were there. So, but anyway, over a period of time, a lot of friends came to my help, and then I was able to do that. Now, let me share briefly how interest in nuclear diplomacy evolved and why I believe it deserves continued attention. And by the way, my thesis on nuclear diplomacy is the first in Pakistan. If you just search the HEC's website, so this would be the first one. My fascination with the nuclear strategy began during my tenure at National Defense University, where I encountered the core paradox of nuclear strategy, the use of non-use. It is a compelling irony that the most destructive weapons ever created are more effective when they are not used. Their value lies in their ability to deter by convincing an adversary that the cost of aggression will far outweigh any potential gain. This deterrence, however, operates not just on the physical realm, it exists in the conceptual plane, where arguments, perceptions, and narratives are shaped. Just as we can win or lose territory, we can gain or lose strategic influence through the way we communicate. Jacques Derrida very eloquently said that nuclear weaponries depend more than any weaponry upon the structure of information and communication. For the moment, a nuclear war has not taken place. One can only talk and write about it. It is in this fragile space between silence and speech that nuclear diplomacy plays the most crucial role. How we frame our intentions, interpret threats, and present ourselves to the world is essential to maintaining deterrence and avoid a catastrophe. Ladies and gentlemen, on May 28, 1998, Pakistan responded decisively to the Indian nuclear test conducted earlier that month. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in our national security and our responsibilities on the global stage. While the technological challenge of building nuclear weapons was enormous, what followed was even more complex, articulating our nuclear rationale to a watchful international community. We had to explain why we build these weapons, what role they play in our national security, and how we intend using them in any future conflict. While our diplomats and decision makers have admirably shouldered this responsibility, there is still much more to be learned, refined, practiced in the subtle and sensitive field of nuclear diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, let me point out that nuclear diplomacy suffers from an eternal internal contradiction. At one end, it justifies the development of nuclear weapons for national defense and security, while simultaneously it supports and promotes global disarmament effort to reduce the risk of a nuclear war. Navigating this paradox, communicating strengths while advocating restraints, is what is called the art of the nuclear diplomacy. It demands clarity, credibility, and careful crafting of language in both international negotiations and domestic narratives. While much have been written about the conduct of nuclear diplomacy and policy positioning by various actors, less had been said about its conceptual foundation. This is where Gregor Mallard's work came in, which proved invaluable. He identified three layers of meaning in nuclear diplomacy, which were employed during the consensus building effort that managed and built nuclear non-proliferation regime. Sometimes the interpretation of legal instruments can be clear as everyone explicitly understands, that is the transparency. Similarly, the interpretation can be ambiguous, where there are claims to the definite interpretations of the meanings, many claims, that is ambiguity. And finally, opacity, where deliberate contradictions are agreed in private but never admitted in public. These strategies are not reflective of failure of diplomacy. They are its operating tools in a system marked by conflicting interests and unequal power. Because nuclear diplomacy is essentially a discursive activity, I adopted a social constructivist lens using Carla Willig's six-step discourse analysis method. I have tried my best, and all those who will read, they will come to know that it is not very easy to implement this. I have operationalized whatever was possible. So whatever I did, in fact, it demanded to unpack how subjectivities are shaped through discourse constructions, employing different discourses with desired action orientations that are translated into positioning and activities. Now you can understand how complex is this discourse analysis. You construct a discourse, select certain terms, certain terminologies, some jargons, create an institution, allow something to legitimate, and then delegitimize something, represent something, misrepresent something. So this is was the intended desire. So Foucault's work on the madness and other things, is very illuminating if you ever go to that. I applied this framework to Indian nuclear diplomacy, focusing on particularly on the selected official documents and Jaswant Singh Strobe Talbot dialogue between 1998 to 2000. Why this period is very important? Because this was a crucial period as the global spotlight on non-proliferation had not yet shifted to the war and terror. And let me tell you that after 9/11, it was a totally contest. The Indian nuclear diplomacy had no problem, no challenge altogether. Now let us look at some of the I'll just share two key findings which I would like that you should all consider and take home from this book. That Indian policymakers understood quite early in that international nuclear debate is dominated by the US. And if they manage to influence the US, then they would be able to convince the rest of the world. So shaping Washington's perception was key to global legitimacy. And indeed, history is a witness how Indo-US nuclear deal facilitated NSC waiver and normalization of Indian nuclear capability in whatever form we see. Now, I agree with you that there were structural factors also that helped. India's liberalization of its economy, the post-Cold War strategic vacuum, and growing anxiety around China's rise. But India's diplomatic success was not automatic. It was constructed through a consistent and effective discourse. This is what must not be missed out. While initiating my study of Indian nuclear diplomacy, I deliberately tried not to include any reference to Pakistan. But the more I tried, the more I failed. Because all discussions in the public and private sphere were overwhelmingly focused on Pakistan. And at one point, even the American National Security Advisor had to give a shut-up call to just what saying to stop talking about Pakistan and start talking what India can do. The more India attempted to dehyphenate from Pakistan, the more it discussed Pakistan, but in a negative way. India constructed the notion of responsibility not in a vacuum, but in a contrasting manner. India presented itself in the best possible manner as the promoter of peace and stability, not only in the region, but in the entire world. It aligned itself with a modern liberal democratic order, employing its own democratic credentials, and deployed its civilizational passivity and neutrality to depict its status quo nature that created an image of India that could be trusted with the bomb. On the other hand, it otherized Pakistan as its counterpart, portraying it as a bad example of irresponsible behavior. Every event and argument was used to malign the image of Pakistan, and the contrast was deliberate. And this is how I present in this book a scientific way of deciphering. This narration is known. We already know this, but where is the evidence? Here I provide the evidence that how increasingly whatever we are suffering here today, what isolation Pakistan suffer, is partly of our making, but mostly it is of the making of India. My study also reveals that Indian nuclear discourse is deeply rooted in a strategic fear. This was a surprising thing for me. A lot of people talk about the strategic autonomy and Indian status, but in this, there is a strategic fear which is rooted in Indian discourse. It is shaped by the historical overhang and civilizational memory. Jaswant Singh has noted that India often feels insult where none exists. This fear extends to its perception of Pakistan, viewed not just as a political rival, but as a cultural, historical threat, a potential gateway for a renewed Muslim domination. May not be physical, but could be cultural, psychological, or even economical. Pakistan is identified as an extension of the Mughal dynasty, thereby connecting the contemporary reality with the historical experience. India thinks that Pakistan alone may not be able to do this, but together with Iran and Afghanistan, it may. And this fear drives India's effort to forestall the possibility of any future alliance of Pakistan with these two countries. Now, in the end, in conclusion, this study aims to open new avenues for understanding the complex and often underexplored realm of diplomacy, particularly in the South Asian context, in a world where the next great conflict may be shaped more by language than the launch codes. We must continue to study how nuclear armed states talk about their weapons, their intentions, and their fears. And I hope this work contributes meaningfully to our strategic, academic, and diplomatic discourse. And I'm deeply thankful to all my mentors, colleagues, and everyone who supported me throughout this intellectual journey. May this book not be the final word, but a starting point for a deeper thinking, more honest dialogue, and greater clarity in the service of peace. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In the name of the Almighty, the Lord of all mankind. First of all, I would like to thank the Strategic Vision Institute for taking this very timely initiative on a book which is of paramount importance, coming in the wake of the momentous events in May. There are 2 Mays which are very momentous, and I think they were Pakistan's finest hour. May 1998 and May 2015, mashallah. 25. So this is a really momentous this month of May in this span of 27 years. Dr. Naeem Salik Saab, General Sattar Saab, the honorable author, और मैं ख़ास तौर पे आपके वालिद मोहतरम अब्दुल हफीज़ साहब को मुबारकबाद देता हूँ कि आपके होनहार साहबजादे ने माशाल्लाह डॉक्टर नसीर ने एक बड़ी ज़बरदस्त, जो कहते हैं ना हमारे पश्तून दोस्त, जालिम किताब लिखी है। बहुत मुबारक हो आपको। I would also like to recognize the earlier panelists who have spoken with a lot of gravitas and substance and information. My old friend and colleague, Professor Dr. Hassan Aski Rizvi Sahib, Ambassador Zamir Akram Sahib, and of course, Benori Sahib. And I'd also like to recognize Ambassador Azaz Sahib. आपको नई किताब तो नहीं आई अभी, क्या आ रही है? क्योंकि इनकी डिप्लोमेटिक फुटप्रिंट्स बड़ी चली थी, and Ali Sarwar Naqvi Sahib also, and of course Dr. Parvez Bhatt Sahib. General Sahib, आपने कहा था, you mentioned that there were 3 new books on nuclear. You forgot the fourth. Fourth इन्होंने produce की है, Pakistan Nuclear Society, the book of Dr. Ashfaq, which just came out. And I was the chief guest there also, where Dr. Parvez Bhatt Sahib launched. And I think it's also a very relevant autobiography of one of the icons in the nuclear science program of Pakistan. ये अभी चूंकि न्यूक्लियर साइंटिस्ट पर्दे में काम करते हैं, उनका पीआर कमजोर है, किताब को ज्यादा पब्लिसिटी नहीं मिली, but it was launched. It's a very useful book because it gives the context from the nuclear scientist perspective. It was launched on 14th of May in Islamabad. And I'll also respond to 2 of the points that you made about economy and also about a Muslim country. First of all, the brief historical context of the Indian nuclear program, aapne bada acha kiya, and the Pakistan one also, that I think there were 2 very interesting books, because what was mentioned, that the Indian nuclear program has always had a combination of hypocrisy and duplicity, jo aapne bhi bataya tha. And if you see the book by Raj Chengappa, which is the secret story of India's quest to be a nuclear weapon power. He's a journalist, by the way. And he has written that as far back as 1957, when Eisenhower had this Atoms for Peace program, there was a secret understanding between India and the United States. Under Nehru, under Bhabha, at that. This is in the book of Raj Chengappa. I'm quoting the Indian source. So this is number 1. Number 2, the book by the former Mossad agent Viktor Ostrovsky, By Way of Deception, mentions that Indian nuclear scientists were working in Dimona nuclear reactor in the 80s. Dimona, Indian nuclear scientists. India recognized and established relations with Israel in 1992, but he's talking of the 80s. And that is why there was a joint plan of India and Israel against Kahuta, and the CIA then tipped off Pakistan, General Ziaul Haq, because of the Afghan war and so forth. So let us be very clear that when they talk of disarmament, they even talk of a peaceful nuclear explosion, PNE. I remember at a seminar in Delhi, they said, we have a peaceful nuclear explosion. Then I said, we'll call it a murder. It can also be bloodless also. So, you are peaceful. But this kind of hypocrisy is very much there. I would also like to commend Pakistan's leaders in the past, because the nuclear program of Pakistan is a success story. And it's an amazing success story because the kind of pressures that were on Pakistan, I think no other country faced those kind of pressures that Pakistan did. And we, with our own resources from 74 to 1998, did what was termed as almost impossible. I remember it was 11th of May, 1998. I was then information minister, and I was with Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in Almaty when we learnt about the tests. And we were taken by surprise. We were there for the ECO summit. And I remember we were, Almaty has hills like the Murray Hills. So we were on sort of a hiking jaunt close to nature. And we got messages from the MS, who's now General Sabat Hussain, Brigadier Sabat, that urgent message. But since the ECO summit had ended and we were just going along, when we got down, we learned that India has become a nuclear power. And I remember Mia Sahab asked me, because he and I were together, and then we came in the car, what do you think? I said, Mia Sahab, it's a very अच्छी opportunity India ने दे दी. It's now or never. Punjabi में मैंने कहा, Mia Sahab कड़ाके कट दो. Okay, that is the only way forward we can do that. Anyway, that I think we came back on 11th of May, and the decision was conveyed to the scientists, Dr. Shwak Saab and Samar Mubarakband on 17th of May, that you start planning. And they said, give us 10 days or so. And it was the right decision. Before that, I'd like to also mention that Mr. Agashai mentioned to me, when the Americans discovered Kahuta facility, and this was after Bhutto Saab had rejected the offer of Kissinger of 1976. He offered 110 A-7 planes, attack planes, and in lieu of Pakistan giving up the nuclear option. And Mr. Bhutto asked the then Air Force Chief, Air Chief Marshal Zulfikar Ali Khan Saab, he said, sir, we don't need the planes, we need the bomb. It was just very clearly, even the Air Force, a lot of clarity. So we turned down that offer. Anyway, Americans thought that it was the reprocessing plant. They scuttled it through the French, but we were, of course, on a different route. And when they discovered it in 79, they leaked a story in the New York Times in August 79 that America has plans to disable Kahuta. A threat was conveyed through the media. A story by Leslie Gelb, who was a national security correspondent. And General Zia then decided to send Agashai Saab to America for negotiations with the United States. And those took place in October 79. And Mr. Shahi was accompanied by a bevy of generals. Lieutenant General Saabzada Yaqub Khan, Lieutenant General Ghulam Jilani Khan, who was Secretary General Defense then, and Lieutenant General K.M. Arif. And they were all accompanying Agashai Saab, and they were talking in the State Department. And then Mr. Shahi told me that when the negotiations were there, they were saying, you are trying to build the bomb and this and that. They took Mr. Shahi, said, we want to have a word with you separately. And he was taken to a room where Secretary of State Vance was there. And there was a gentleman by the name of, those of you who are in the nuclear field would know his name, Gerard Smith, who was the principal nuclear negotiator of the US with the Soviet Union. So Mr. Agashai said, he walked in and he said, oh, Mr. Gerard Smith, he said, I'm just from Pakistan. I'm not from the Soviet Union. And he said, look here, Mr. Shahi, you are entering the valley of death if you pursue the nuclear program. We will not allow it. And he said it in a way. And Mr. Shahi said he had big horn-rimmed glasses. He looked at, he took out his pipe because he spoke a pipe. He said, we are a very small country. We can't build a bicycle. How can we build a bomb? So this is how. But when he came back, he reported to President Ziaul Haq. And President Zia summoned Dr. Ishwaq Saab. He said, kindly locate the place where we will test the nuclear bomb. October 79, Dr. Ishwaq Saab led a team. Chari was selected 19 years before Pakistan tested. So this is, I think, it shows that Pakistan's determination, our will, our vision. And I'm talking of successful, because successive leaders, Mr. Bhutto started it, and this is General Ziaul Haq at that time, and America and sole superpower and so forth. So this is, I think, a tribute to the Pakistani resilience and national resilience, because other countries who had the money, whether it's Iran or Iraq or Libya, they couldn't do it. So you can't build a bomb off the shelf. It shows that kind of determination. And coming to the book, I've read through the 176-page book, sir, 6 chapters. 2 of the chapters which I found the most important and interesting were, one is the Indian worldview, because that is extremely important for us. How India sees itself, how India wants to project itself, and how India views Pakistan, which is it. And throughout, you have mentioned Gulwalkar, Gandhi, Nehru, there's a consistency that the Indian identity has a very strong anti-Muslim, anti-Pakistan component. And that is a very key. So Indian worldview is a very important chapter. The second chapter, which I found very informative and interesting, is the one which is about the private sphere. You talk of the public sphere also. Because the private sphere dissects the 8 rounds of dialogue between India and the United States through Strobe Talbot, the Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, and a class fellow of Clinton in Rhodes and Oxford, and Mr. Jaswant Singh. And both of them have given their narratives. Talbot in his book Engaging India, and Mr. Jaswant Singh also in his book. So, and the important thing is to understand is that these negotiations are taking place in 1998 after the nuclear tests and before the Kargil episode. The Indian animus about Pakistan, you know, and the third or fourth round, he starts talking about Pakistan, very sophisticated, softly, and says, I'll give you a worldview in a very civilizational context, because he had a very sonorous tone, I know, and spoke very softly, and Indians to create an impact, you know, and as if he's talking as a guru of the, you know, from his ashram, more or less. So in that context, he said, India is a civilization state, and Pakistan is an artificial construct. And Mother India, Mother, so Akhand Bharat, that is that worldview. And it, as you're right, Sandy Berger had almost to tell him, cut it now, enough of anti-Pakistan. The whole thing was devoted against Pakistan. So that's what was the strategy? Demonize Pakistan, and they were very upset, don't treat Pakistan and India at par. And you mentioned the date, 15th of April. But why the date 15th of April? 15th of April is 9 days after the Gauri test, 6th of April, which was the turning point. 6th of April, I remember I was called for a meeting at the PM House, and General Karamat and Dr. A.Q. Khan were there, and Prime Minister was there, I was there, and they said, okay, we'll play this tape, cassette. And they said, Mubarak, we have tested the Gauri, which means we can reach any part of India. And that was the game changer. That was the turning point. And I think India took the decision to test, and that to preempt that, they said, we'll have dialogue. They nominated Jaswant Singh already on 15th of April, which is a month before the test. So this, I think the date is important for that reason. Ambassador Zamir Akram asked about two things. One about the economic factor. You said that perhaps the economy factor was weighing on Pakistan and in the negotiation. No, I don't think that's true. It was the other factor, the diplomatic factor. Issue was that in the negotiations, if you notice, India had nominated their foreign minister to negotiate with the Deputy Secretary of State of the United States. Pakistan had nominated their foreign secretary, who's to negotiate with their secretary of Deputy Secretary of State, Stroke Talbot. The Americans did feel a little slighted. The reason was domestic, because Mr. Gohar Yub, if you remember, had already tendered his resignation on 2nd of May. And he was then removed as foreign minister on 7th of August, and Sartaj Saab took over. Mia Saab did not trust Gohar Yub Saab. So in order to, and we also had a minister of state, by the way, Mr. Kanju, but he was not taken into consideration. So that, I think that decision also made a difference in the nature, the quality and the content of the dialogue. For example, you mentioned also, and this is already documented, that Stroke Talbot drove himself to the Watergate Hotel to pick up Jaswant Singh to take him to his house for a private meal and all this sort of. Those special things were denied to Pakistan because he felt he was dealing only with the administrative system, not the highest political offices. And I think that made a difference and that dialogue of India and US laid the basis for the special relationship which emerged later on. The other issue you mentioned, perhaps that it was the factor of being a Muslim country. I think it's very much true. And this has been corroborated by none other than President Rajab Tayyip Erdogan. I led a Pakistan parliamentary delegation in August 2016, 1 month after the abortive coup against President Erdogan. And Pakistan Parliament and I had sponsored a resolution also, solidarity and so forth. They were very happy. They invited, it was all parties delegation. So we had a meeting with President Erdogan in Ankara. And the meeting was supposed to last for 30 minutes. It went on for 90 minutes. And we had a very long chat. And I also told him about CPAC. And I said, Mr. President, I'd like to give you some free advice as a journalist that you should be friends with two leaders. One Putin and one Xi Jinping. He said, why Xi Jinping? I said, we are your best friends, and China is our Pakistan's best friend. And China and Pakistan are building the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which starts from Xinjiang, where the majority is population speaks Turkish, and they are Muslim also. You should be part of that process. Then he recounted one thing about the nuclear thing. He said, I didn't name the person. He said, the French president told me during one of the meetings that they had with Mr. Erdogan that, and I quote, that we made a mistake with Pakistan. Because we were busy in the Afghan war, we didn't have the eye on the ball, and Pakistan became we were allowed Pakistan, more or less, the saying, to become a nuclear weapon country. He said, never again will we allow any Muslim country, we meaning Europe. He's a French president, and don't forget, after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, when the decision was taken by Sykes and Picot to divide up the Muslim world, Syria was with France. The French general who went to Damascus, General Guéraud, on 1920 said, the first thing I want to visit is the grave of Salahuddin Ayyubi. And he kicked the grave. He said, oh, Salahuddin, we are back. We are back. 1187 was the liberation of Jerusalem. And after 733 years, the French general says, we are back. So there is this mindset of crusades, which is evident also in the Iran-Israel war also. When the West talks of we, that that Netanyahu is doing the dirty work for us, it is the West. So this is the Muslim factor is a very important factor, a paramount factor in the worldview of the West, which Indians exploit very successfully. Finally, I'd like to thank, I think, the President Trump for taking a very positive and a very balanced position on the recent conflict, Indian aggression, where Pakistan gave a bloody nose to the Indians, taught them a lesson. And I think President Trump has exposed India because they are lies. Then he's brought Kashmir to the forefront, said the core issue is Kashmir. And it says it's an issue for hundreds of years. By that, he means the Hindu-Muslim issue. And then finally, last week, when he said 5 Indian planes were shot down, I think that is the final vindication of Pakistan's position. I think ultimately the truth does come out. And as Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And India tried that and they failed. Thank you very much, and Pakistan Zindabad, and thank you very much for the great book you wrote.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the conclusion of today's event, but it's time for the group photo. All the speakers are requested to proceed to the stage for the group photo. Meanwhile, rest of the audience can proceed to have refreshments which have been served. Thank you and wish you all the best.